All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the UVA Medical Center Hour and welcome to our first Medical Center Hour of this semester. Really exciting event to kick off a great semester for us to come. My name is Justin Mutter. I'm the Director of Medical Center Hour, which is a program, those of you may not know, of our Center for Health Humanities and Ethics at UVA. Today, we're really delighted to offer this event in partnership with the UVA Health Sciences Library. This is a History of the Health Sciences lecture, which is a series that invites us to explore key topics in the history of healthcare, the health professions, et cetera, that strongly influence today's clinical practice, today's clinical education, and so on. And I want to especially thank Megan Cashwell, the Alvin V. and Nancy Baird, curator of historical collections with the Claude Moore Health Sciences Library, who's with us today, for her steadfast collaboration and support of this event and making us happen. Our session today is a hybrid of in-person and Zoom. So when it comes time for the question and answer from our attendees, we will have a microphone for those of you who are here in the auditorium, and for our friends on Zoom, we ask that you please put any questions in the Q&A tab of your Zoom screen, and then our moderator will follow those and present those to our special guest today. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's lecture, UVA's own Professor Dominique Tobbell. Professor Tobbell is the Centennial Distinguished Professor and Director of the Bjoring Center for Nursing Historical Inquiry at the UVA School of Nursing. She is the author of now 3 books and many, many essays that explore the complex political, economic, and social relationships that developed after World War II between universities, governments, healthcare industries, health professions. These are all relationships that, of course, continue to impact our modern day health systems. So Dominique, thank you so much. Welcome. Thanks for guiding our conversation today.
Thank you, Justin. So it's with tremendous pleasure that I introduce today's speaker, Dr. JAIPREET VIRDI. Dr. VIRDI is an award-winning historian whose research focuses on ways medicine and technology impact the lived experiences of disabled people. Her first book, Hearing Happiness, Deafness Cures in History, raises pivotal questions about deafness in American society and the endless quest for cure. Hearing Happiness received the British Society for the History of Science's Hughes Prize and the American Association for the History of Medicine's Welch Medal. Dr. VIRDI has also published articles on diagnostic technologies, audiometry, hearing aids, and the medicalization of deafness, and has essays that have appeared in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, Wellcome Collection, Psych, and Slate. She's also the co-editor of two volumes, Disability and the Victorians, Attitudes, Interventions, and Legacies, and Colonial Histories of Plant-Based Pharmaceuticals, a special issue of the History of Pharmacy and Pharmaceuticals. As an educator, Dr. VIRDI is currently an associate professor at the Department of History at the University of Delaware, where she teaches courses on disability histories, the history of medicine, and health activism. Born in Kuwait to Sikh parents, Dr. VIRDI lost her hearing at age 4 to bacterial meningitis. By the age of 6, her working class family immigrated to Toronto, Ontario, where she would later attend a school for deaf and hard of hearing children. A product of so-called mainstreamed education, Dr. VIRDI learned to lip read and rely on her hearing aids. She then attended public high schools, then received her bachelor's degree in the philosophy of science from York University. And after graduation, she took some time off and worked in marketing and fashion merchandising before deciding to return to school. And she received her master's and then her doctorate from the Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science and Technology at the University of Toronto. So today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Dr. VIRDI, who will be speaking to us about negotiating normalcy, deafness cures in American history.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Dr. Tobbell. Thank you all for joining us today, both in person and in Zoom. The lunch looks delicious for those of you who grabbed a lunch pack, so do enjoy. Today I'm going to be discussing a little bit from my, sound okay? All right. Discussing from my first book, Hearing Happiness, But to begin, I want to start with a letter written by a deaf woman named Clara Seaman, who once lived in Ithaca, New York during the early 20th century. In 1919, she wrote to Arthur Cramp. This fellow on the screen here. Cramp was the director of the propaganda department of the American Medical Association, which was later renamed the Bureau of Investigation. And this organization, well, at least this department, served essentially as a clearinghouse for people to receive information about all kinds of medical therapies that were being advertised or asked about the integrity and practice of a physician. And as director, Cramp often ended up being the main contact person for people who were curious about the legitimacy of medical therapy that they were undertaking. And many Americans who were concerned about their health concerns or their health issues wrote letters to Cramp. And the letters are still around. They are all kept at the American Medical Association archives in Chicago and give us this remarkable insight into a social history of disability and deafness, because these are people talking about their health issues, describing the kind of treatment they receive, and also outlining the challenges they were having with regard to being a deaf person or person with hearing impairment living within an old society. So this is one letter that Clara wrote to Cramp. And she was specifically asking whether Cramp could help her select a new course of treatment. There were so many earphones, she writes, good, bad, and indifferent, and so many kinds of artificial eardrums, etc., that one who was deaf spent a lot of time, money, and nerve trying them out. The thing for Clara is that she was debating asking another physician for advice, but explained to Cramp that it was very hard to find a physician who knows enough about these devices to know whether they fit your case or not. And even if an otologist or an ear specialist did know, they couldn't guarantee that this treatment would be effective. And this is what Clara wanted Cramp to confirm. Was there an effective, permanent treatment for deafness on the health market that she could purchase? In Clara's story, like the thousands of other Americans who wrote to Cramp, are central in my book, Hearing Happiness, Deafness Cures in History. At its core, Hearing Happiness narrates how cures for deafness imagined and forwarded notions of normalcy that oftentimes contradicted with the experiences of deaf people moving through the auditory world. And following the archival trail where deaf people do emerge, I uncover stories not just of medical despair or struggles in search for cure, but also stories about relationships and hope as deaf people and their families, especially the hearing family, negotiated with the physician, with other medical providers, with quack sellers, and even themselves in the quest for normalcy. Essentially, what this book argues that these are all stories about the presence of normalcy, and above all, what so-called hearing happiness meant to people who could hardly hear. And more importantly, these stories outline deafness as an auditory spectrum, with the variations of experiences in managing deafness and attempting to treat it, either to restore lost hearing or shock, sometimes literally dead ears, to create or make use of any residual experiences of sound, even in ears that had never heard anything. So through Hearing Happiness, I show how deaf people in their family, mostly their hearing family, tried ordinary and extraordinary measures in the hopes of eliminating deafness. Often, despite the boastful pretensions of advertisers, most of these cures were actually not certain in their claims to elevate deafness. and nor were they painless. But this actually did not stop people from either trying or recommending treatment. For if there was even a glimmer of possibility, a glimmer of hope that the hearing could be fully restored, then that was a cure worth trying. Because this is what it's like to be deaf in America. Any cure is better than no cure. So my book brings disability into the forefront of American capitalism by tracing how conceptions of deafness and hearing were not only transformed through medical discourse, but also part of a broader American expectation of able-bodied citizenship. In other words, then, like now, deaf people were expected, if not believed to be required, to fix their hearing defects. In the 18th century, advertisements for deafness cures, as they were called, contained all kinds of self-tested medical recipes or home remedies that were peddled by traveling salesmen. A century later, all specialists intervened in the market economy, selling their own diagnostic techniques and promoting surgical innovation in order to frame deafness as a medical rather than a social or educational problem. The entrepreneurial flair of all specialists raised further questions of credibility. How do we actually trust these cures? Quackery became tied up with most, if not all, deafness cures. So to purchase a deafness cure essentially meant to subscribe in this market of medical quackery. And this was especially profound at the beginning of the 20th century, when patent medicine advertisements started to feed into the growing public distrust of medical experts whose remedies failed to meet the demand for speedy treatments. So today I'm going to be drawing very generally from this book and focusing on the marketing and expansion of hearing aid commerce in the 20th century to better understand how some of these cultural ideas about deafness were being propagated through the advertisement and through capitalist ideas of able-bodied citizenship. So this was largely a period in which solutions of hearing impairment became increasingly technocratic. The decibel was introduced as a fixed term for measurement. Government was surveying hearing acuity on a nationalized scale. Medical and surgical procedures were becoming more and more standardized, and out of the chaos of the First World War, a new category of hearing impairment emerged. And this was the hard of hearing. A group of people who lobbied for their condition to be classified as a medical handicap, thereby distancing themselves from the deaf, with the capital D, community with its rich culture and language. This classification shaped a new conception of deafness to be introduced in the medical and cultural area. And that is, hearing impaired people were, quote, not deaf and done for, but rather hard of hearing and hopeful. And these cultural transformations manifested broader ideologies of normalcy and citizenship that began to be mediated by capitalism. Advertisers, salesmen, newspaper writers, and consumers were all collectively essential in shaping expectations of health governance by articulating a medical ethos that very quickly started to become dependent on technology. Capitalism, as much as the medical infrastructure, broadly speaking, started to shape what it meant to be a normal deaf person in America. Someone who was godly, civic-minded, self-sufficient, and perhaps above all, hearing. So the application of electricity as medicine, referred to as electrotherapy, capitalized on this idea that if we can send messages through long wires over long distances, then perhaps surging electricity through the body could unblock diseases and improve health. Indeed, The period between 1880 and 1920 is often referred to as the golden age of electrotherapy, because this was a time when any reservation, any doubt about electricity therapeutic efficacy started to fall to the wayside. So people became more trustworthy, or people trusted the potential of electricity to help cure diseases. Many entrepreneurs began to seize upon the market potential of offering electric therapy as a purchasable health treatment. These devices offer an effective but gentle remedy for the consumer who was either distrustful or disappointed with the physician. These consumers could buy a cure where all other treatment options were limited or had failed. And in some instances, these electric machines were often promoted as the only way to restore the nerve force in the auditory canal, to correct any damages that affected hearing. And this was the case for Carolyn Perkins, who lived in Rochester, New York. In 1870, when Carolyn was 2 years old, her parents, the philanthropists Gilman and Caroline Perkins, who would later establish the Rochester School for the Deaf, they took their daughter to the New York Eye and Ear Infirmary to be properly examined by one of the most prominent surgeons at that time, Cornelius Weir Agnew. In a private letter, Caroline wrote about her daughter being evaluated by Dr. Agnew. He knew from her squirrel-like movements before he made any examination that she could not hear. He said it was hopeless and we need never to try to do anything for her, that she had no auditory nerve or it was paralyzed. The Perkins were distraught about their diagnosis for their daughter. However, Caroline refused to give up and frequently explored different treatment options and specialists in the hopes that her daughter's deafness could be cured. And in the meantime, they also learned about opportunities for deaf children to learn sign language and learn how to speak and read and write. So the Perkins employed 2 deaf teachers to serve as a private tutor for their daughter, and these teachers would later go on and establish the foundation for training at the Rochester School for the Deaf. But still, the Perkins hoped as their daughter grew that more and more medical opportunities could be available. So when Carolyn was 16, her mother took her to visit the physician Edmund Agnew, who had devised a new course of electrotherapy for deafness that consisted of a series of mild electric shocks directly applied to the girl's ears. These treatments continued every day over a series of several weeks in the hope that the girl's hearing would be permanently restored. And for a moment there, it seemed that it was working. Caroline would describe to her mother sounds she had never heard before: a dog barking, the scratch of dinner chairs on the floor, and even the moment that the band at the skating park has stopped playing. And if you have been around deaf people enough, or maybe if you yourself have any hearing issue, you know these are sounds that are heard through vibration. So you feel the sound, the sound that reverberates through objects. The moment they stop, you know when they stop. And that's exactly what was happening with Carolyn here. But Agnew believed in his electrotherapy. And after a period of several months, he supposedly refined it to better improve Carolyn's hearing, eventually reducing it into 3 times a week until he decided to stop because no further improvement could be obtained. Carolyn, after all, remained deaf. And she would go on to be a deaf teacher at the Rochester School for the Deaf as well. But Carolyn was actually one of many middle and upper class deaf Americans who turned to the physician, or whose parents took their children to the physician, hoping that electric currents could revitalize their auditory nerves. For those who were unable to afford the physician's electrotherapy fees, there were a range of electrical devices for medical purposes that were available on the consumer market. And with the rise of electrification and the surge of cheap consumer goods, these products capitalize on the excitement of electric energy as a means of salvation, of like taking control over your own body and your own course of treatment, making use of the extraordinary creative force that called on the power of nature to rejuvenate health. So you can buy all kinds of electric devices, belt, hairbrushes, collars, chains, corsets, or larger equipment like the one pictured here. These were fueling an appetite for easy remedies that could be felt by electric shocks. And these were certainly attractive for consumers because they could feel the immediate results of the using electricity on their body. They could see spirals of spark. They could feel their hair racing, and they could hear the low hum of generators. And sometimes shocks produce a sensation that people could feel, sometimes so strongly that it worked as a placebo effect. And this was actually a campaign that was launched by Guy Clifford Powell, who sold his electrovibratory cure for deafness out of Illinois. The device was marketed in two versions, Model A, which is pictured here, and a near faithful reproduction of Powell's patent, and Model B, which would appear by 1905 and was a much more compact model. The Model A was advertised to physicians, and Model B was advertised for the general consumer. This apparatus functioned by pumping air into the ears through cotton-covered electrodes soaked in salt water, largely through these the wires that are coming from the machine here, which would be plugged into the ears. And then once the so-called stethoscope-like apparatus is in the ear, we turn on the machine and electricity would be sent directly into the ear. Powell advertised his device as the wonder of the century that offered a positive and permanent cure for deafness. And his advertisement were included alongside a self-portrait in his mustachioed glory. And he also claimed that this was a product that required very minimal intervention from the physician with no pain and no detection from work, and could also purchase additional accessories like his vibrator, which you would use the pressure of air to unblock any blockages in your auditory canal. This was initially priced at $100 and sold to American and British clients who wrote to requesting a trial for home or office use. But now, if shocks created an immediate sensation, then vibration and massage was part of a therapeutic performance. Manufacturers of handheld devices claim that an immense vibratory force enabled electric waves to pierce the entire body and refresh each nerve and cell in the body. These vibrating massagers were often an inexpensive alternative to the high-frequency generator machine like Powell. And the massaging system was promoted with this idea that vibration could break up deposits in the ear that they claim were responsible for hearing loss. So for example, Jordan's fanciful all vibrator was a compact instrument for home use that, as you can see in the image, was clamped onto a table right here. And you would extend from the earpiece to the ear and then crank to deliver kinetic force of vibration to the ear. Another interesting device building on this idea was the eartone that was developed by E.D. Moon, who operated out of Toledo. And it is typical of this overt marketing techniques used by electrical entrepreneurs. like you buy this or your money back, like it promised to work. And Moon claimed for only $25, the device was guaranteed to restore your hearing, and claimed that up to 95% of consumers obtain immediate benefit using the eartone. Now, one of the most notorious so-called vibrating devices was Charles Fenke's vibraphone, some of which included his trade secret. He claimed that there was radium inside some of the models here, which were really tiny metallic devices that you could wear in your ear. And what's fascinating about this device was that he claimed that radium, in addition with vibration, could actually cure all kinds of ear diseases and permanently restore any lost hearing. Now, you would think that these kinds of electrotherapy products were largely only promoted by electrical entrepreneurs or those quack salesmen. But actually, even pioneering hearing aid companies offer their own electrical cure for deafness alongside their main product. And the fact that they sold these devices suggests to us that the history of hearing instruments didn't necessarily follow a linear path, in which the more advanced hearing aids started to supplement the earlier questionable devices. But perhaps more importantly, the fact that the hearing aid firm was selling these kinds of massagers and vibrating devices is indicative of this broader cultural stigma against deafness, in that a cure, especially a permanent cure, is always much more preferred than any assistive device. So Miller Reed Hutchinson, for instance, who developed the first commercially wearable electrical hearing aid, the Acousphone, which was later rebranded as Acousticon and introduced in 1901. At the same time, you could also purchase at discounted cost Hutchinson Mastercon, which was an electrotherapy device that sent vibration to the ears. Another prominent hearing aid company was the Gemphone company, whose Gemphone was very popular and very well received by deaf consumers. Still, the company promoted the auto ear massage, which consumers could obtain for a discounted cost of $10 and a free trial. And consumers were told that the vibration could stop ear pain that were developed as a result of wearing the Gemphone hearing aid. But also, supposedly, the ear massage could cure all kinds of ear diseases by increasing blood circulation. And finally, the Mears Earphone Company, working out of New York City, which was the second oldest manufacturer of hearing aids, also had their own line of electrotherapy products that were promoted as deafness cures. Now, many of these kind of gadgets would actually disappear in the 1930s due to changing regulation of the Food and Drug Administration and the emergence of more and more powerful vacuum tube hearing aids. In the late 1940s, Zenith, which was at the time one of the top 5 hearing aid firms of the mid-20th century, created a new training film for the salesman on the new product that was branded as, quote, the world's most attractive hearing aid. This film addressed the tendency of consumers to favor devices that could be hidden or invincible. And we learned from the voiceover. Now, vanity is working for us. Now, hearing aids are part of the personal appearance market, sparked by the biggest single force in the American market: pride, prestige, vanity, the desire to be at one's best, to look one's best, the desire to be modern, to be smart, to be in the swim, to look important, handsome, dignified, this distinguished look. With the world's most attractive hearing aid, a new powerful key to open up the entire hearing aid market. The very specific reference to vanity here signifies a transformation in hearing aid technology and advertisement that began in the 1930s. This was a time when hearing aid technology itself underwent a dramatic shift, when sub-miniature vacuum tubes made it possible to combine the amplifier and the microphone, both which are remnants of the carbon telephone, into a single package unit that were connected to wire-ear receivers. These models allowed hearing aid devices to be wearable on the body. So essentially, you would just have the receiver, sometimes a separate battery pack, and the ear cords. These hearing aids were known as multi-packs. And they were technologically superior to earlier devices, far more powerful than mechanical ear trumpets. But users still found wearing the devices frustrating. Product pamphlets often advise consumers to wear the devices underneath the clothing, strapped on the undergarments or worn with the assistance of additional harnesses. But when you wear devices like this, what ends up happening is your clothing rubs against the microphone, and it creates a lot of sound distortion that makes it complicated for having clear sound, especially for understanding speech. So you can imagine the sound interference and poor acoustic quality frustrated a lot of users. And it was also complicated as well, because depending on how you wear it, sometimes the wires were very restricted and you wouldn't have free movement of your body, or the wires would get in the way. So think of a time before Apple's AirPods, okay, or Bluetooth technology, when we were still wearing, maybe some of us still do, wearing earphones with the wire. I would get caught on things and just like rip off, and how annoying that was. That was the daily experience of consumers wearing hearing aids like this. But more crucially, users who complained to the company, they testified that wearing hearing aids like this actually revealed their deafness rather than concealed it. Because no matter how much manufacturers boasted about all of their technological advancements, they could not create a device that would allow a user to pass as hearing. So in response to this constant stream of complaints for consumers, Irving Stoutrell, who was president of Sonotone, another industry leader, asserted in a speech to his industry salesmen. He urged them to specifically target deaf consumers' feeling of shame and inadequacy that obligated them to conceal their deafness. In other words, he instructed salesmen to focus on the psychological benefits of hearing aids. Because not wearing a hearing aid was far more conspicuous, because no matter how well a user could conceal the aid with crafty fashioning, the strained deaf face, the face of confusion of mishearing was so common that it actually gave away that this person was deaf. And the deaf face was so discernible that salesmen carried laminated cards like this to show their consumer the before and after effect of wearing the hearing aid. And here's actually one of my favorite advertisements elaborating on this perspective, on the unlimited benefits of how good hearing can actually improve one's sense of self. So we have the before and after image. In the before image, at the very top here, we see, it said, it's blocked by the bar there, but it said what price deafness. And we have this image of a middle-aged white man having this scurry deaf face. We see signs of acoustic hearing surrounding around him, being darker and darker as we get closer to his ear. And around him, we see examples of social and in a sense, social and cultural participation. Deafness leaves him, thank you. What price deafness? Well, deafness leaves this man socially handicapped. He experiences insecurity in business. He experiences conversational strain on himself and others, and loneliness, and he's disturbed by others shouting at him. But buying his acousticon, his head is up. chin up, shoulders back, a big smile on his face, and the acoustic sound radiated away from his ear. What happiness hearing? Well, family and social life become joys again. He has his companionship with children. He's renewing the spiritual comfort of his church service, and he's experiencing his business security. And these were same messages that were also circulated directly to consumers through industry-sponsored magazines such as Better Hearing, which was sponsored by Zenith, and Better Living, sponsored by Sonotone, and often made an appearance in the waiting room of audiologists and otologist office. And other pamphlets also directly targeted how people, like deaf people themselves, can participate in the self-improvement. Sonotone promoted the pamphlet titled Fashion Your Passport to Poise, targeting the young and fashionable deaf woman who wanted to maintain her glamorous self. And again, that the concern about the deaf face revealing one's deafness was also used as a very stark message here, including no woman is prettier than the expression on her face, and that wearing the product actually allowed her to effectively assert her fashionable self. Now, these strategies were directly aimed to capitalize on beauty and sartorial expectations for women to be stylish, slim, and well-groomed, but no illusion or trick can conceal the obvious markers of deafness. Vanity, as industry leaders knew, was the driving force for hearing aid acceptance for both men and women. And in the meantime, industry leaders were also aware that advertisements themselves needed to target the psychological messages. They needed to target the implications of how wearing the hearing product could also be an individual experience. So we see references of individualized fitting that require precise audiological diagnosis as a powerful strategy to demonstrate how hearing aids were personalized too in their so-called appearance market. And these messages became more compelling when manufacturers began to combine two innovations emerging out of the Second World War: printed circuit boards and button batteries to produce even smaller models that again became more powerful when all merged into one single unit, the monopack. And by 1952, the commercial availability of the transistor, which supplies power to the hearing aid, made it possible to design not only more powerful hearing aids, but also smaller hearing aids. We start to see these box-like devices becoming smaller and smaller to the point that they're worn completely in the ear. Transistor hearing aids became so popular that a year after their introduction, 97% of all hearing aids on the market were transistor model. So they completely replaced the vacuum tube devices. But the transistor hearing aids were not necessarily cheaper, more reliable, or always practical. They were smaller enough that they could be hidden in the ear or in eyeglasses frame. And the smaller the size started to become the chief selling point of hearing aid companies. And the smallness also reconfigured this notion of invincibility, like hiding one's deafness and passing as hearing, such that nobody knows that you are deaf. Correcting hearing loss became presented as a matter of public service. And though these devices were highly gendered and designed to be inconspicuous, modern hearing aids were, as industry leaders asserted, an actual response to the consumer's complaint. And vanity was still such an obstacle that some hearing aid companies created very creative strategies to work around this. So Parabox, for instance, avoided the word deaf or hard of hearing in their advertisement after a focus group revealed that they disliked those terms. Instead, they came up with this idea of this hear zone, an imaginary bubble that surrounds each one of us that gets larger and larger the more our auditory worlds expand. So as these technological advancements enabled hearing aids to become smaller, paradoxically, the stigma against deafness increased. Deaf people, the hearing aid industry argued, had no excuse for not choosing hearing restoration. The message was clear: to hear is to live. But advertisers were, of course, were merely portraying aspirational social reality, which did not always fit with how deaf users integrated with the hearing aid, the bodies, or their identity. So advertisers' social mirror distorted and selected what it reflected. This meant some social realities hardly appear at all. So what does better hearing mean, for instance, for those lives who aren't represented in these advertisements? We hardly see non-white people included in corporate archives or in advertisements before the 1960s, but we see messages of matching all skin color or options of ebony or ivory of hearing aid. This gives us instances of tracing race and ethnicity through the corporate archive. So in conclusion, why advertisers crafted and purveyed a vision of social life in America, the goal was to reflect ideas about individual health and happiness as encapsulated by their products. And in a sense, this need for participation in hearing society congealed the stigma surrounding deafness by tying it to technology and expectations of citizenship. People who declined to wear an aid or refused other kinds of therapy were not stigmatized so much for being deaf, but rather stigmatized for refusing to be hearing. And we still see this process today in the form of paternalistic reprimands commonly leveled against people who wear cochlear implants, and essentially expected to pass as hearing and conform to social expectations to assert their normalcy. Deaf people relied on hearing aids, medical therapies, electrotherapy products, speech training, and a host of other kinds of unconventional therapy that promised grand miracle but failed to deliver. And advertisers honed in this method by establishing conformity through normalcy. The problem of deafness, they insisted, was nothing more than the problem of better living. To fail to assimilate into the hearing world meant to be un-American, and to fail to conform was to give up one's quest for hearing happiness. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that fabulous presentation, Dr. Verdi. We're now open for questions. If you have a question, if you're on Zoom, feel free to put your question in the chat and I will relay the questions to Dr. Verdi. If you're in the room, raise your hand and we will have John will come around with a mic to raise your question. As you ponder on your questions, I'm going to take moderator liberty and ask one. So Dr. Verdi, throughout the history of the deafness cures that you presented, cost seemed to be a big issue and the class status of potential consumers. So I'm particularly interested in, especially once we see the introduction of hearing aids and that pressure, that responsibility to be hearing, how was the cost of the devices? How did that impact access? And what of the possibility for health insurance for hearing aids? Why, how does that play in?
No. Okay, is it on?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So that's a really great question. In fact, the cost of the devices also tell us something about who were using these products. I would argue before the 1930s, acoustic devices for hearing were incredibly expensive. Most people who purchased some of the early carbon devices, which range between upwards of a couple $100, which would be like in the tens of thousands of dollars today, were wealthy people. Many working class or poor people prefer to use very simple tin trumpets. It serves their purposes. And it's also why we see a very rich growth of sign language at the time. There was a different form of communication. the vacuum tube and later transistor hearing aid did not actually become, in a sense, affordable for the majority of people until after the Second World War. Because several things happen. You have an ease of distribution. So you have the hearing aid companies themselves have larger distribution and larger salesmen to target different areas of the market. You have this pride in American modernism that relied on people to purchase new technologies, and you have more competition in the hearing aid market. Most hearing aids around the 1930s were upwards of $300 to $800 again in the downturn, if we convert the cost. But during the Second World War, in order to fuel deaf people participation in the war effort, to work in factories, etc., hearing aid companies competed for government contracts to produce more affordable hearing aids. The one the lowest at that time was about $50, which was really cheap at the time. Not that it was very effective, but it was cheap and it was available. So the price competition continued after the war. And in fact, like how much something cost did certainly depend in the decision a person would make to whether or not they wanted to purchase this device, and especially whether or not they could upgrade to a newer model. So you see stories of like people in the 1970s still wearing hearing aids from the 1930s. Like, why didn't they upgrade? Well, because they couldn't afford it. And more importantly, I would claim, well, if the 1930s hearing aid worked, why would you change? Why would you like constantly upgrade? So the second part about your question about insurance, that is still a very much a major issue today in the American context. Hearing aids are not covered by health insurance. They were never meant to be covered by health insurance. From the 1950s to the 1990s, there was a constant lobbying campaign at the Senate and in various Senate committees because the hearing aid industry did not want to have hearing aids classified as medical devices. So if they were classified as medical devices, insurance would cover it. Rather, to continue the monopoly and to continue the extraordinary cost markup. So hearing aids even today are sold at a markup of about 275% of the retail, of the manufacturing cost. In order to have that monopoly, the industry has constantly lobbied for hearing aids to be classified as consumer products. And as a result, and I don't know if some of you might know about the whole over-the-counter hearing aid that came up last year. Over-the-counter hearing aids were introduced as another capitalist interjection through the monopoly. So to give people more affordable options, but they're not effective for a wide range of users, and nor do they require that individualized fitting that actually improves how one wears hearing aid. The easier solution would have been just to reclassify hearing aids as medical devices to get insurance coverage, not introduce more competition. So I'm sorry, I could rant about this all day long. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions in the chat, so we'll start with one. Can you say more about how deaf people responded to these devices? Did they blame themselves if the devices didn't work?
Absolutely. There were various responses. I've seen sources where some deaf people, especially with the first device, they definitely blamed themselves. They thought that, you know, them not being able to easily wear the hearing aid was a reflection on their own bodily self. Especially when they were younger, like there's this sense of like pride and identity that came with that. Older deaf people or people who lost the hearing through progressive deafness or tried different items and often blame the device. Some of them wore devices for such a long time, they knew how to maintain and repair their own devices. They knew what was not working, like whether it was the wire, whether it was the battery, and they often would argue with the company. But there's no uniform experience. They're very much varied.
Any questions from the room? Oh, yeah. Oh,
You
oh.
wait, I'm gonna get the microphone.
Hi. So my question regards, like, as you said, that as the stigma became solidified with like folks being seen as like choosing not to hear, I was curious about then with like these devices weren't effective. Was it considered like, I guess, better to still perform wearing them for this, like, to avoid that stigma than even if the device wasn't working for certain deaf folks?
That's a great question. I mean, the messages were always, it's better to wear the device than to claim a deaf identity. So even if these devices worked fitfully, if they weren't effective communication tools at, say, sign language, it was still very much preferred to wear these devices. And this was a constant message that was also propagated through deaf schools, like all deaf schools that use hearing aids and speech therapy to teach their children rather than sign. They often had like group hearing aids where it could be basically a large receiver and each child would have like their own headphone. And a child that had difficulty or failed to hear was considered to be problematic. And it was their fault for not improving their auditory self. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the great talk. Actually, my question might build on the answer that you just gave. Maybe it has something to do with schools, but most of your talk focused on the relationship between the producers of the hearing aids and the users. And I was wondering whether there were ways in which users themselves could communicate among each other about like what worked and what didn't work and how to modify them. Your answer just a minute ago in a different context about like user modification of them or kind of repair was really interesting too, because they look like very kind of black box sort of consumer devices. So I guess just kind of what sort of user culture was there around exchanging information and knowledge about them? Thank you.
Repeat the question.
And what were there networks of were users exchanging information with each other about what worked and what didn't?
Okay, yes, yes, absolutely. And that's actually a different project that I'm doing right now because while hearing happiness is about how the marketing of the devices were shared to, deaf communities. One project I'm working on right now is on how deaf communities like threw all those marketing ideas out the door and like claim for themselves what they want the device to do. And one of the ways they did that was often by having workshops through like social organization, like the League for the Hard of Hearing, which was an organization that emerged in New York City and then had chapters all over the United States and Canada. And the League often had workshops where people could come in and like troubleshoot the hearing aid and learn how to do basic maintenance. Maintenance culture was very much a dominant part of our society. Like we were taught to fix things, or like know where to go to buy things that to like replace wires or vacuum tubes or things like that. And some of these information that were shared were often published in the newsletters and the magazines at school. And people also wrote to each other. So they would read a magazine, say, sponsored by Zenith, which did a profile on a deaf person. So people would write to that person and say, hey, you talked about your hearing aid here. Can you tell me how to repair, blah, blah, blah. So that was very common. There's a very rich social history here. And additionally, hearing aid company did sell product maintenance books as well. So the same way, anytime we buy something new, there was like an instruction guide. So that was also included in the I guess the box where the hearing aid comes in. But what's interesting, most of these troubleshooting guides also required you mailing out to get repair parts. But the idea of hearing aid, where it's coming together and like working and repairing the hearing aid, I think it's really fascinating. And it's also about how we think about our instrument, how we know that doing basic repair would allow it to be more effective. And I just want to add one more thing. It's also there's a lot of information exchange about how to wear the hearing aid. So there are sources in which women who were struggling to do, say, like women who worked as a domestic worker, so she needed to like clean and move, like her body had to be flexible in a sense to do her job. Couldn't have wires getting in the way. So she designed a new dress pattern to safely put the hearing aid and the external battery so she was able to do her job. And then she shared that dress pattern in a Deaf magazine as well. So there's lots of stories about that as well.
We've got time probably for one more question there. I've got some on the chat that I'm going to turn to. Sorry. So in the early 19th century, the establishment of schools for the deaf were often motivated by concern for spiritual well-being of deaf people. And they noted, and this person noticed in your earlier ads, you demonstrated the same concern, like, do you struggle with hearing in church? Did this continue in later marketing?
That's a great question. I mean, in a sense, yes. Seeing ads in all the way up until I would say 1950, showcasing the different social elements where deaf people could find themselves, including in church, was provided as an added benefit. So, I mean, there's an older history that some other historians have talked about the missionary zeal of churches and missionary groups to evangelize deaf people through the Christian religion. And deaf people are also religious, so they wanted to be able to hear a church service. So they fought for churches to have either group hearing aids or different kind of acoustic instruments built into the churches so they could hear the preacher. And the fact that these messages were offered in advertisement were just in line with like succeeding in school, succeeding in business, being around your family, hearing your baby cry. It was kind of like one and the same. In a sense, kind of create a more holistic picture about what it meant to be a deaf person. Mm-hmm.
All right, unfortunately, we are out of time, but I want to thank you all for attending, including those on Zoom. Thank you, Dr. Virdi. Thank you, Dr. Tobbell, for this great lecture and discussion. Just a quick note about future medical center hours. As many close followers of our medical center hour know, we had to reschedule our event with the U.S. Surgeon General in collaboration with the Compassionate Care Institute of the School of Nursing last fall. That was scheduled to be in early February. It is most likely at this point going to be a taped version. So look out for that. And those of you on our email listserv, we will probably tape it, not live, but then share that with you in March. So our very next live medical center hour will be on February 21st. That'll be a Zoom only event, and that will be our second of the History of the Health Sciences lectures for this semester. We will virtually welcome, it'll be Zoom only, so virtual only, Professor Iram Elam, who's the Assistant Professor of the History of Science at Harvard University. Dr. Elam will speak to us on her groundbreaking work on immigration, international medical graduates, and the care of under-resourced communities in the United States. So hope you can join us for that. Thank you again, Professor Virdi, and thanks for everyone for being here.